Welcome viewers to the MIDDVantage series, Exploring Careers in Global Security. This episode is Nuclear Energy and Global Security. My name is Eli Horton, class of 2022 at Middlebury College, and I'd like to introduce you all to this episode's guest speaker. So I'm joined today by David Peranteau, class of 2009 at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. David is currently team leader of support program coordination with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Welcome and thanks for joining us, David.
Thanks. I'm really glad to be here. So good evening or good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in.
So David, in this series, we're looking at a number of different professional areas and how they relate to global security issues. So if you could just tell us a little bit about the IAEA and how it fits within the nuclear energy dimension of global security, as well as what you do in your role.
Sure. So again, it's my pleasure to join all of you today. But the International Atomic Energy Agency has been around since about 1957. That was our founding year. And it really is designed to promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, of which there's kind of a lot. So everything from actual energy for power, but also nuclear applications in medicine, science, technology, even things like insect sterilization, which turn out to be hugely important and useful, making food safer. There's all kinds of different uses for nuclear technology. The organization was set up really, you could say, to help cement the grand bargain of a particular treaty, which is one of the most successful treaties in human history, called the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. This set up a system globally whereby there are certain countries that are permitted to have nuclear weapons. There's 5 of those. That's the United States, China, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom. And everyone else who signs on to the treaty, which has now, I think, 180 or so signatories now, most countries on Earth, has to pledge not to develop nuclear weapons. And in exchange for that, they receive advantages in nuclear technology that they receive sort of in transfer from other countries and from my organization. So the International Atomic Energy Agency was set up to help kind of implement this bargain by, on the one hand, making sure the countries that have pledged not to develop nuclear weapons are in fact holding to that pledge. That's the piece of the organization that I work for. And then to advise them on other aspects of nuclear technology, such as the development of nuclear energy, getting their nuclear security right, working on things like nuclear safety. So all of that is sort of more of an advisory role for the organization. And then in terms of the development side, there's nuclear applications and technical cooperation, which assists states in developing the uses of nuclear technology domestically for their own advantage and development. So my organization has departments for each of those particular umbrellas. But the largest of those umbrellas is nuclear safeguards, what we call, which is the intrusive inspections that member states accept. So yeah, it's a large organization. There's about 2,400 people altogether who serve in the IAEA. My department has 800 or so of those, most of whom are actual inspectors. And what the inspectors do is they go into all the different countries that have signed on to this treaty and concluded agreements with the IAEA pursuant to the treaty, and essentially try to make sure that they're not secretly developing nuclear weapons, which is a challenging job. There's a lot of different pieces to that job. It involves a lot of different kinds of technology to be deployed, everything from open source analysis and analysis of like satellite imagery to on-the-ground radiation detection, exploration, all kinds of different gadgets that the inspectors use to verify that, you know, if you say this is 10 kilograms of plutonium, we can verify that it in fact is 10 kilograms of plutonium and it's not being diverted to some other purpose. So it's verification of declared nuclear activities and making sure that there are no undeclared nuclear activities, which again is a really challenging job. So my particular role is I'm focused on relationships. In order to do the job, we have a kind of a regular budget, which is about 180 million euros per year for my part of the organization. And that budget funds all of our regular activities, sending inspectors to the field, the equipment, the technology, most of it. But it doesn't actually support any kind of R&D to increase our capabilities and kind of keep up with potential proliferators and what they might be able to do. So for all of our R&D and improving our capabilities and getting better at all the things we need to get better at, from again, satellite imagery analysis to better gizmos in the field, we get extra help from member states who really care about nuclear non-proliferation. There's 21 countries that provide us with extra resources, and I manage the relationships with those countries, basically to support the agency's R&D to consistently get better at detecting undeclared activities, for example. That's a sort of big picture of what I do. I can delve into little pieces of that.
So when you talk about these safeguards, what are some of the protocols that your team uses when they discover that a country is using nuclear technology, to develop nuclear weapons or just in a potentially dangerous?
Yeah. So thankfully, it doesn't happen very often, but it has happened a number of times. Some cases that you might have heard about. There's been an ongoing saga with the Islamic Republic of Iran. We are the party now that is actively implementing the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, with Iran. And so we have inspectors in Iran 24/7 monitoring not just their sort of normal obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but the extra set of obligations that they took on pursuant to that deal. So specific stockpile levels of enriched uranium, things like that, the centrifuge R&D. So we have inspectors on the ground verifying all of that. We've had non-compliance, we call it non-compliance issues. So basically when a country is not complying with the obligations that they've undertaken internationally, with DPRK, so North Korea, with Libya back in the day. There was that Syrian alleged reactor in the desert that was bombed, that we then had to go explore and try to understand if it was a reactor. So there's been a series of cases over the years. South Africa was an interesting case back in the past. Iraq, obviously, we've had several dealings with over the years, mostly in the 90s. But we don't really have any enforcement capability. So what we do essentially is there's a board of governors. Our director general, who's Rafael Grossi at the moment from Argentina, would prepare a report basically outlining our findings and what noncompliance we believe we're seeing, how serious it is. And then we report that to the Board of Governors, which is consisting of most of the states with nuclear technology and kind of the main players in like the UN Security Council. And then it's really up to them as to what they do about it. Generally speaking, they would put together a Security Council resolution and then take some kind of action either individually or collectively, ideally collectively. But really, again, we have no enforcement capability. We're just trying to inform everyone about what is going on and make sure that any breaches are detected quickly, reported, and then dealt with in some way.
Awesome. So about the relationships that you were talking about, how managing the relationships between member countries, can you just go into a little bit about what you personally take as the most important aspect of that job, or your mindset going into managing those and keeping those stable?
Yeah, I mean, there's two pieces of this for me. So there's one of the role that we play in kind of being an enabler of cooperation between states. So even apart from this kind of special relationships that my organization has with the donor countries that provide us with extra stuff, part of the reason why our work is so important is that it is extremely important that, for example, Russia not suspect that Germany is secretly developing nuclear weapons, or that Korea believes that Japan is secretly developing nuclear weapons. And we provide them with that confidence. So it's just something they just don't really have to worry about. And it turns out that basic fact enables all kinds of cooperation in the nuclear realm and in other realms in terms of their overall feeling of well-being and security. You can imagine in a world where they had no assurances that anyone could secretly be developing weapons, that most states would then feel the need and the onus to develop their own deterrent to ensure that they're prepared for a situation in which a regional rival or a neighbor is doing the same. So it basically just brings the temperature down of the conversation globally and makes sure that states can decide safely to not develop nuclear weapons and get certain things in exchange for that in terms of guarantees and then technology. So that's kind of our assistance to the relationships. In terms of our donor countries, most of the countries that provide us with extra support are, again, just really interested in non-proliferation as an idea. The idea that we shouldn't have a massive spread of these weapons. It would make the world more dangerous, less stable. And it's some of the sort of usual suspects that you can consider. So the United States is our single largest donor, United Kingdom, France, but we also have Russia, Japan, Korea, South Africa, and a lot of European countries, Argentina, Brazil. All of these countries have their own priorities in terms of ensuring these weapons don't spread across the globe. And it's our job to basically make them feel that whatever donations they can give us, either in terms of money or expertise, that we are really utilizing that to make our own work stronger. And that's that relationship management I find really fun and really interesting, because it's sort of a combination of technology, policy, diplomacy, and like on the ground, real world practical implementation. We're not just like writing studies and hoping people read them. It's like, we're going to send 5 inspectors to your country tomorrow, and we want to make sure that they have the best possible tools to do the job.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for those responses. And so now I think we're going to shift gears to your personal experiences from campus to career. So you were an undergraduate at Dartmouth, and then you received a Master of Arts in International Policy Studies, non-proliferation at the Middlebury Institute at Monterey. So if you wouldn't mind just talking about your path from Dartmouth to Monterey, and then how that landed you your position at the IAEA.
Sure. So I actually developed an interest in nuclear weapons specifically from some undergraduate courses that I took at Dartmouth. We actually had a visiting professor who was focused on that area and taught a specific class, a sort of seminar class for advanced students in the government department, sort of political science. And that was just really mesmerizing. And in particular, I just grew really fascinated, in particular with the prospect of nuclear accidents. At the time, Scott Sagan had a book out called The Limits of Safety, which is a really famous book about some near misses from the Cold War, when we almost like just completely destroyed ourselves for the most stupid reasons imaginable. Just like some guy made a mistake, put the wrong tape in the training room, for example, or that we accidentally detected satellites or detected launches that were in fact satellites. There were all kinds of little silly things that almost weren't silly. And that was a truly terrifying prospect to me, and one that I thought we could work to try to reduce, in part through sort of non-proliferation. So you've got these weapons spreading around at that time. India and Pakistan were flaring up regularly. It just seemed to me that trying to kind of lower the temperature again there would be a useful thing to do with my life. So I got interested pretty early on. And the choice of coming to the Middlebury Institute was actually pretty interesting. I looked at other graduate schools that also do great work in this area. So the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. I looked at a lot of the sort of DC-based graduate schools like American, and then other schools like Tufts, and then Harvard and Princeton both had really excellent programs. In the end, why I chose Middlebury was because of the highly specialized coursework in this specifically that they were offering, and no one else had anything even close. So instead of taking like 1 or 2 courses on like nuclear writ large, I could have a course on export controls, an arms control simulation where we're simulating trying to develop a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. I had a separate course on just the nuclear renaissance, so just learning about the energy technologies that were coming along for new reactor types and how that would relate to the proliferation potential of these different types of reactors. So really just very highly specialized coursework, and a strong focus in that one area that I've grown very interested in addition to Middlebury's just amazing reputation for languages. I was very interested in French. I had spent some time in undergrad. Dartmouth also has very good language programs, really developing those skills, and I wanted to continue with that. I thought it would be important to my career. So it combined the reputation of quite strong in that one area, and then the language. And then in addition to that, they have the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, the James Horton Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, right at the Middlebury Institute, which gave me kind of a part-time job doing what I really loved in addition to my studies. So that was a pretty great. From Middlebury, it became, I mean, we can talk about a little bit about where I went from after Middlebury, but the decision to go there I thought was a really strong one for all of those reasons.
Awesome. Yeah. So then after your graduation from Monterey, what did you obviously had this interest in undergrad, which led to the more specialized program at Monterey. And then what did it look like after that? Your job search, or what sort of places you worked at before maybe you ended up at the IAEA?
I actually, when I think back, I also compare like Dartmouth's job placement activities with what I got from the Middlebury Institute, and I just got far more in terms of practical advice and assistance from the Middlebury Institute than I ever did from Dartmouth. really what happened was Middlebury Institute had some specific and fairly exclusive access to these unbelievably cool internships. And for me, what was particularly crucial is that they were paid internships, which I don't know if you've been looking for internships lately, but finding a paid internship is a pretty big deal. Like, it's really tough. So I had a paid internship at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. They still have this. I was actually one of the pilot interns for this program that was focused on nuclear safeguards. It's funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. And that was paying like $3,000 a month, which again for an intern, what? That's great. So I did that, and that helped qualify me for an internship at the IAEA. So I actually came over to do an IAEA internship for 5 months. And that was really, the reason I got that was really the strength of the relationship between the Middlebury Institute and the IAEA at that time, where they were sending interns over quite regularly to the Division of Public Information here at the IAEA. So really, they sort of set me up with both those internships, helped really throughout that whole process. And then those 2 internships, I think, really helped to qualify me, in addition to the coursework, for my first out of graduate school fellowship. So I'd applied at the time for both the Presidential Management Fellowship Program, sort of the State Department thing, and then U.S. Department of Energy has its own fellowship for the National Nuclear Security Administration, called it used to be called the Non-Proliferation Graduate Fellowship Program. Now it's called, I think, the NNSA Graduate Fellowship Program. But this is something I would strongly encourage any of you who do go on to graduate school to check out. It's essentially a paid fellowship year, so they pay like an actual good wage for the entire year. As part of it, you get your security clearance, which is really important for future career moves. And it put me in the Office of Non-Proliferation and International Security at NNSA's headquarters in Washington, D.C., which was just an amazing experience. And from that, I got to collaborate with stakeholders all across the U.S. National Lab Systems, Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, Brookhaven. And the portfolio that I got was actually nuclear safeguards, because I had some experience from the Livermore internship. So I really got thrown into that role right from the fellowship and got pretty high-level responsibilities from the start. And then that turned into a job as a contractor with NNSA, which is in turn would eventually qualify me for my role here at the agency. So I've found also that I work now with lots and lots of former fellows here at the agency, but also at the Department of Energy, the State Department. So it's a really good particular path for Americans to consider, along with something like Presidential Management Fellows. I should also just briefly say that I have a lot of Middlebury alums here at the agency as colleagues. So my the co-team leader is from Finland. She's also a Monterey graduate from about 5 years before me. I was just talking about half an hour ago to another Monterey graduate who's working in our information analysis division. So they're really actually all over the place here at the Department of Safeguards, because with a degree in nuclear non-proliferation, there's not like a whole lot of different places one can end up. So a lot of for here.
Yeah, so that, that progression to me makes a lot of sense. You start with these internships that, qualify you for, your internship at the IAEA and then other, positions in the future. And you sort of, you touched on this with your, fellow colleagues who are also Monterey grads, but how does your, experience, maybe in more general picture, relate to colleagues or others in the field?
That's a really good question. I think I am an outlier in the sense that it is rare for people who work here in the International Atomic Energy Agency and in the Department of Safeguards to not have some kind of pretty intense scientific background. The vast majority of my coworkers are engineers, physicists, chemists. We have actually a lot of people who are biology backgrounds, significant lab experience, often hardware developers, a lot of IT people, increasingly IT people, because it's important for everything. We're pushing into sort of like artificial intelligence areas, and again, they're trying to sort of scale up a lot of staff and things like machine learning. So it's very rare to have someone with a kind of international relations diplomacy background. It's not unheard of, but it's more rare. A lot of the diplomats that we deal with on a regular basis have that sort of background. There's permanent missions here in Vienna from all over the world that mostly have people coming from a foreign affairs, diplomatic background. But this is a really kind of technocratic organization in many respects. So it's almost as though having a technical degree is sort of key to credibility to a certain extent. Otherwise, you just sort of have to learn on the job, which is essentially what I've done. However, we do actually have a significant number of people with that kind of background that are in one area, which is our open source intelligence sort of gathering arm. So this is the part of our organization that does open source analysis and research on countries to look for any indications of potential undeclared activities or just activities that should have been declared that weren't. So for example, if they find a scientific article that suggests that some work on reprocessing plutonium has taken place, that's the sort of thing that must be declared to us because it has implications for the building of weapons. And if they haven't declared it, that's something we need to have a conversation about. Most of that is pretty non-confrontational. It's just sort of like make sure you declare this next time. But it also could be an indication of something bigger going on. And in the past, it has been an indication like that. So yeah, it's rare for people to have the background that I have, but I've actually found it pretty useful in many respects.
Yeah, definitely. So that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing those experiences. And thinking about all these experiences and what you know now, what advice might you give to current students to how to prepare themselves for entry points into the career? Obviously, you said your path has been pretty different compared to your colleagues, but yeah, what sort of advice would you give to other students who might be?
Yeah, I think it is worthwhile to develop somewhat rare and marketable skills in whatever that might be. So in my area, actually a deep understanding of any particular science is really useful. An understanding of IT tools can basically be leveraged for just about anything these days. We're finding that people who have specialized knowledge of, let's say, robotics or again artificial intelligence can apply those skills across a lot of different problems that we run into. Just as a quick example of that, one of the things our inspectors have to do is review a ton of surveillance imagery. So they have surveillance cameras all over the world. These are very specialized, highly secure cameras that are recording just huge amounts of footage. And they sort of have to go through this footage and figure out what might be fishy. And that is just both incredibly difficult and incredibly boring. And so we're trying to develop artificial intelligence tools that would basically define what is normal activity at this facility and what is something that we would consider weird, and just prioritize the set of things that are maybe weird for an inspector to have a look at those first, and then see, if it's worth digging into further. The advice that I have, is really just develop a skill set that then you can market. And for me, my skill set was in part based on, language skills, knowledge of international affairs, and then eventually a pretty highly specialized knowledge of nuclear non-proliferation specifically that I developed in graduate school and then with the internships. The other thing is find out, one useful thing that I found in my career is find out sort of where the money is in a particular field. So in the case of non-proliferation activities, the United States is one of the largest funders of non-proliferation related R&D. So the Department of Energy has a lot of money for this kind of work. They give it to the national labs, but also contribute to my organization. And so in the end, a fellowship with DOE, which is a sort of almost a grant-making entity for all this really interesting work, turned out to be useful for all these other organizations that I wouldn't even have thought of. So think tanks value that experience, labs value that experience, international organizations value that experience, just knowing the people, knowing how they make decisions, all of that. And that is basically something you can develop through strategic internships, fellowships, things of that nature. So I just say go after those wherever possible. And that really can help make your application kind of shine and stand out.
Okay, so yeah, so you were talking about your marketable skills, being languages and policy, and then, so maybe moving on to the advanced degrees, you got specialized knowledge from the Monterey School, and what do advanced degrees look like with, how do your colleagues have experience in advanced degrees? Also, what doctorates might look, what doctorates, or if that's even useful in the field.
I think it's really useful to talk to people, depending on the particular field that you selected. It's really useful to talk to people in that field about what is considered most useful and normal for someone that you would like to, for example, follow their type of career path. One of the things that I learned, being a sort of political scientist, international relations kind of person, is that most of the people that I kind of wanted to emulate actually had master's degrees more often than they had PhDs. And I actually had a lot of friends, both in undergrad and graduate school, who went on to PhDs and got very specialized, and it didn't really provide as much sort of marginal benefit as you might expect. So actually, in the field of international relations, I would consider the master's degree to be kind of the more practical terminal degree for most people. That's the degree that will qualify you for most government positions, think tanks, other organizations. PhDs are still very useful for certain situations. If you want a job at like the Rand Corporation or again, certain think tanks, certainly a university. If you want to work in an academic environment, you need a PhD. For most other environments in the IR world, I find a master's is just far more useful, easier to get, faster. On the other hand, if I talk to my technical colleagues, if you're a physicist and you have a master's, that's kind of a joke. Like you need to have a PhD if you're a physicist. There are very few IT people here with a PhD. They have like undergrad or master's maybe, and they do just fine. Engineers also typically have only master's degrees, sometimes PhDs. So again, it's completely field dependent as to what is considered to be the normal terminal degree. But what I would say is that an advanced degree of some kind at some point is almost certainly worthwhile for most of these kinds of careers. As an example, in the UN system, there's a system of sort of P positions, and they're numbered. So there's P1 through P5 are the different professional levels, and then there's director positions at higher levels than that. But most entry-level jobs are P1 or P2 that require just a couple years of experience. P3 is a little bit more mid-level. P4 and above can be sort of managerial or more specialized. In our organization and most UN organizations, P4 and above absolutely require an advanced degree. And I would say it's unusual for even P2s or P3s to not have one or to not be working on one. So it's just much easier to get hired if you can check that box. My wife she came with me to Vienna. She did not have a master's degree when she came here. She actually also was a Dartmouth grad. And she's pursued a master's degree online from Penn State, in part because she just kept running into that requirement over and over again for jobs that she was otherwise really well qualified for. And she actually got a job without a master's degree, but with a sort of promise that she was working on one. So I would consider it to be something worth considering. But I think it's also very worthwhile to sort of take stock after your university time and assess what you want to do. Maybe take a couple years to get some more professional experience and then do a master's, which is actually what I did as well. I took a few years off college and then master's.
Not to put you on the spot, but if you had any sort of closing remarks or final thoughts for students to take away from your experiences and what you've seen in your field, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been in nuclear non-proliferation for a while now, and I find it to be a really exciting field that could use more interest. There's a lot happening right now in this area. I mean, again, from Iran to DPRK to we're just about to now enter new START negotiations with Russia, and all of these things require a lot of different backgrounds to make work, and that's part of what I love about it. Is sort of this. It's really interdisciplinary. You get people from all kinds of different backgrounds that can all contribute different things. And it also has the sort of value of being kind of real. One of the things that I grew frustrated with periodically during my time as an undergraduate, and particularly when I was looking at PhD programs, was this sort of prospect of ending up in a position where I would be like writing these big papers and agonizing about word choice and sentences and produce a huge paper, and then like no one would read it. I'd like put it out there and be like, this will influence a policymaker, and just they're not going to read it. They don't have time for that stuff, like in general. So trying to find a place where I could make like a real world difference in this field in international relations, that's what actually ended up drawing me to this particular area and all the real problems, the on the ground implementation that we have to deal with on a regular basis. So I would say if that's something that's important to you, I would give it a consideration. Or if another area like development interests you, international development, Again, try to find who's making the impact, the kind of impact that you would like to make, figure out what they did, and give that a shot. I think that's always a good strategy.
That's great. So David, thanks again for meeting with us and help students prepare for their careers. And this concludes our episode in the series Exploring Careers in Global Security. And in closing, I want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career perspectives and advice from a number of professionals in a broad variety of organizations in our other episodes in the series. I want to encourage you to tune into the other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the Events and Programs tab on the CCI website.